The stage lights shone brightly, illuminating the massive crowd of fans chanting his name. Snoop, Snoop, Snoop. The music blared, blending seamlessly with the deafening cheers, creating an unforgettable atmosphere. Snoop Dogg stood on stage, microphone in hand, his eyes scanning the sea of people below. He smiled, a smile of pride and fulfillment. This was the moment he had dreamed of since he was a young boy growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Long Beach, California. Snoop had just wrapped up the final song of a sold-out concert in a major city. It was a night to remember, where he delivered his signature West Coast beats, heartfelt lyrics, and an unmistakable stage presence. Every verse he rapped seemed to resonate with the audience, making them dance, sing along, and lose themselves in the music. For Snoop, music wasn't just a job. It was his way of telling his story, of connecting with the world. As the final song ended, Snoop raised his hand high, bowing respectfully to the audience in gratitude. The applause and cheers roared through the venue like a tidal wave, washing away all the exhaustion he felt. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from pure happiness. This was the pinnacle of his career, a moment he knew he would never forget. After leaving the stage, Snoop walked into the backstage area where his team was waiting for him. Hugs, congratulations, and radiant smiles filled the room. Someone handed him a bottle of water, and he took a long sip, feeling the coolness spread through his body. "You did it, Snoop," a close friend said, patting him on the back. "Tonight was yours." Snoop chuckled, but deep down he felt a wave of emotion. He thought back to the tough days of his childhood growing up in a poor neighborhood. The dusty streets, graffiti-covered walls, and sleepless nights filled with the distant sound of gunfire. He once believed he would never escape that place, that his life would always be trapped in the cycle of poverty and violence. But music had saved him. It gave him an escape, a chance to tell his story and inspire others. As the team began packing up, Snoop sat down in a corner and pulled out his phone to check his messages. A flood of congratulatory texts from friends, family, and fans filled his screen. He smiled as he read the loving and encouraging words. But among those messages, one anonymous text suddenly appeared, making him freeze. "You might be famous, but you're still just an ***R. Snoop stared at the screen, feeling as though a punch had landed squarely in his chest. He didn't know who had sent the message, but the words cut deep, like a sharp blade slicing through his pride. For a moment, all the joy and pride from the concert seemed to evaporate. He felt a simmering anger rise within him, but he quickly suppressed it. Snoop took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew this wasn't the first time he had faced racism, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Since he was a child, he had heard similar words, endured disdainful looks, and dealt with baseless prejudice simply because of the color of his skin. But he had learned how to rise above it, how to turn negativity into fuel for his ambition. He put the phone down, determined not to let the message ruin his mood. "It's okay," he told himself. "I've come this far, and I'm not letting anyone drag me down." He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked out of the backstage area, where a limousine was waiting to take him and his team to the after-party. On the way there, Snoop gazed out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the night. He thought about the fans who had come to see his performance, the ones who had sung along to every lyric and cheered for him with all their hearts. They were the reason he did what he did, the driving force behind his creativity and dedication. He knew that despite the haters and those who tried to diminish him, there were millions who loved and supported him. When they arrived, the party was already in full swing. The room was filled with laughter, music, and dazzling lights. Snoop walked in, greeted like a hero. Friends, colleagues, and close fans surrounded him, congratulating him on a spectacular performance. But even in the middle of the crowd, Snoop felt a twinge of loneliness. The anonymous text still lingered in his mind like a ghost haunting his thoughts. A close friend noticed his pensive expression and asked, "You okay, Snoop? Something on your mind?" Snoop shook his head, forcing a smile. "Nah, it's nothing. Just a long day, that's all." His friend patted him on the shoulder, not pressing further. But Snoop knew he couldn't keep ignoring things like this forever. He needed to do something, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their skin color. That night, when he returned to his hotel, Snoop sat down at the desk, pulled out a notebook, and began to write. He wrote about his feelings, about the struggles he had endured, and about his determination not to let anyone dim his light. The words poured out of him like a stream, carrying all his pain, anger, and hope. He knew that no matter how many people hated him, he would continue to stand tall. He wouldn't let the negativity overshadow his success. And more importantly, he would use his voice and influence to fight for equality, to inspire others, and to prove that no matter who you are or where you come from, you can rise above and shine. That night, Snoop Dogg wasn't just a rapper. He was a warrior, a symbol of hope and resilience. And he knew that his journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After a wildly successful performance, Snoop Dogg and his close friends decided to celebrate. They chose a luxurious restaurant in the heart of the city, renowned for its upscale ambiance and exquisite cuisine. It was a special night, and Snoop wanted to share the joy with those who had stood by him through his long and challenging journey. The limousine pulled up in front of the restaurant. The neon lights from the sign reflected off the car's windows, creating a dazzling scene. Snoop stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and walked in with his group. They were laughing and chatting, still buzzing with excitement from the performance. Snoop felt confident and at ease. He had worked hard to reach this point, and now he wanted to enjoy the fruits of his labor. As the restaurant doors swung open, the atmosphere inside shifted immediately. The lively chatter and laughter of the diners began to fade. Curious, judgmental eyes turned toward Snoop and his group. Some whispered to each other while others simply stared in silence. Their gazes weren't those of admiration or positive curiosity, but of judgment and even disdain. Snoop noticed it right away. He was no stranger to such looks. From a young age, he had faced discrimination, and even now, as a global star, it hadn't disappeared. But he decided to ignore it. He wasn't going to let those stares ruin his evening. Snoop and his group approached the reception desk. A young waiter stood there, dressed impeccably, but his expression betrayed his discomfort. Before Snoop could say anything, the waiter spoke, his tone cold and unwelcoming. "Excuse me, but do you have a reservation?" Snoop smiled politely. "We don't have a reservation, but I see there are plenty of empty tables. We're happy to wait if necessary." The waiter glanced at Snoop's group, his eyes scanning each person as if assessing them. After a brief pause, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, but we can't serve you without a reservation. It's the restaurant's policy." Snoop looked around. Indeed, there were many empty tables, some occupied by just one or two people. Clearly, the no reservation excuse was just a pretext. He felt anger rising within him, but he tried to stay calm. He didn't want to cause a scene, especially in such a public place. "We're willing to wait," Snoop said, his voice calm but firm. "We just want to have dinner after a long day." The waiter frowned, clearly unwilling to budge. Before he could respond, an older man sitting nearby spoke up. He was dressed in an expensive suit, holding a glass of wine, and his eyes were filled with contempt. "People like them don't belong here," the man said loudly, ensuring the entire restaurant could hear. The words hit Snoop like a dagger to his pride. He turned to face the man, his gaze sharp and piercing. The restaurant fell silent, and all eyes were on him. Some diners looked uncomfortable with the man's comment, but no one spoke up to challenge him. That silence, to Snoop, was more painful than the words themselves. Snoop took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. He knew that if he reacted strongly, it would only make things worse. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew the best way to handle it was to stay composed and not let them see how much it affected him. "We're not here to cause trouble," Snoop said, turning back to the waiter. "We just want to have dinner. If you can't serve us, at least be honest about the reason." The waiter hesitated, but before he could respond, the restaurant manager appeared. He was a middle-aged man with a polite demeanor, but an unfriendly look in his eyes. He glanced at Snoop and his group before speaking. "I'm afraid we can't serve you tonight. This is a high-end establishment, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." The manager's words were like fuel to the fire. Snoop felt his anger surge, but he still managed to keep his composure. He knew that if he lost control, they would use it against him. "I understand," Snoop said, his voice cold. "Thank you for clarifying. We'll leave." He turned to his friends, signaling for them to leave, but before walking out the door, he stopped, turned back to the manager, and said, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but I won't let this slide. You can refuse us, but you can't deny the truth." As they stepped out of the restaurant, Snoop felt a mix of anger and disappointment. He was used to discrimination, but that didn't mean he accepted it. He knew he had to do something, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly like this. His friends remained silent, not wanting to disturb his thoughts. They knew Snoop was processing what had just happened. Once inside the car, Snoop pulled out his phone and began recording a video. He spoke about what had just occurred, about how he and his friends were treated simply because of how they looked. He didn't yell or show anger. He simply stated the truth, with a calm but powerful tone. "This isn't just about me," he said in the video. "This is about everyone who's ever been treated like they don't belong, just because they look different. We can't let this keep happening." Snoop's video quickly went viral on social media, drawing the attention of millions. But for Snoop, this was just the beginning. He knew the fight against injustice was far from over, but he was ready to face it head-on, because he believed that truth and justice would always prevail. Snoop stood at the reception desk trying to remain calm. He was no stranger to judgmental stares or prejudiced remarks, but that didn't mean he accepted them. He looked directly at the waiter, his voice steady but firm. "We're willing to wait. Just give us an empty table, and we won't bother anyone." The waiter hesitated, his eyes avoiding Snoop's. It was clear he didn't know how to handle the situation. Before he could respond, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit stepped out from the back. He was the restaurant manager. The man looked Snoop and his group up and down, his gaze cold and full of judgment. "I'm afraid you can't stay here," the manager said, his tone polite but distant. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. This isn't the place for people like you." Those words hit Snoop like a punch to the gut. He felt anger rising in his chest, but he knew he couldn't let it show. He had been in situations like this before, and he understood that losing his temper would only make things worse. "I don't understand," Snoop said, his voice calm but laced with frustration. "We just want to have dinner. There are plenty of empty tables and we're willing to wait. Why are you refusing us?" The manager smirked, a condescending smile that only added fuel to the fire. He crossed his arms and looked at Snoop as if he were someone unworthy of being there. "This is a high-end restaurant," the manager said. "We have our standards, and I don't think you meet them." The tension in the restaurant was palpable. Some diners turned to watch, while others whispered among themselves. But no one spoke up to defend Snoop and his friends. That silence to Snoop was more painful than the manager's words. While Snoop was trying to keep his composure, a nearby customer quietly pulled out their phone. They began recording the scene, capturing the interaction between Snoop and the manager. But instead of documenting the injustice Snoop and his group were facing, the customer twisted the narrative. When the video was uploaded online, the caption read, "Celebrities think they can do whatever they want." The video quickly went viral on social media. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, with countless comments flooding in. But instead of sympathy, Snoop found himself the target of criticism from a portion of the public. Many people, unaware of the full story, began to condemn him. Who do they think they are to demand special treatment? Just because they're famous doesn't mean they can break the rules. If they didn't make a reservation, then being turned away is fair. Why make a scene? Negative comments spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Snoop, who was used to being misunderstood, still felt a pang of hurt. He couldn't believe that even when he and his friends were clearly the victims of discrimination, they were being painted as the villains in the eyes of the public. Back at the restaurant, Snoop knew there was nothing more he could do. He turned to his friends, his expression heavy with disappointment. They didn't say anything, but he could see the hurt in their eyes. They had hoped for a fun, celebratory evening, but instead, they were publicly humiliated. "Let's go," Snoop said quietly. "It's not worth staying here." The group silently left the restaurant, leaving behind the curious stares and hushed whispers. As they stepped outside, the cool night air of the city seemed to soothe some of the anger burning inside Snoop. But he knew this wasn't over. He couldn't let this injustice be swept under the rug. When Snoop got home, he opened his phone and saw the video of himself circulating online. He read the comments, each one like a dagger to his pride. But instead of feeling angry, he felt sad. Sad that the truth had been twisted, sad that so many people were quick to believe the worst without knowing the full story. Snoop decided he couldn't stay silent. He opened his camera and began recording a video. In it, he recounted the entire incident, from the moment he walked into the restaurant to the moment he was asked to leave. He didn't yell or show anger. He simply told the truth, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I wasn't there to cause trouble," he said in the video. "I just wanted to have dinner with my friends after a long day, but we were turned away. Not because there weren't any tables, but because they didn't think we belonged. This isn't the first time I've faced injustice, but I won't let it keep happening. Snoop's video quickly gained traction. His fans, those who truly understood him, began to speak out in his defense. They shared his story, calling for people to look at the situation fairly. But even so, there were still those who continued to criticize him, accusing him of overreacting or seeking attention. Snoop knew that in the fight against injustice, there would always be people who didn't stand with him. But he didn't care. He wasn't doing this to be liked or admired. He was doing this because he believed the truth needed to be told and justice needed to be served. That night, as Snoop sat alone in his room, he looked out the window. The city lights sparkled in the distance, but inside he felt a deep sadness. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. There were countless others out there just like him, fighting for fairness and equality. And he wouldn't stop until those lights didn't just sparkle, they illuminated the truth. Snoop sat alone in a dimly lit room, the glow from his phone screen reflecting on his face. Negative comments flooded social media, each word cutting into his pride like a sharp blade. He was used to being misunderstood, but this time, the injustice he and his friends had endured was being twisted into a completely different story. The video of him being denied service at the restaurant had gone viral at lightning speed, but instead of receiving sympathy, he had become the target of criticism from a portion of the public. Who do they think they are to demand special treatment? If they didn't make a reservation, being turned away is fair. Why make a big deal out of it? Another celebrity trying to grab attention. Those words made Snoop feel both angry and disappointed, but he knew that if he stayed silent, the story would remain distorted. He couldn't let the truth be buried under lies. He had to speak up, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly like him. Snoop took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He placed his phone on a stand, adjusted the angle, and turned on the camera. In the dim light of the room, his face appeared clear, his eyes steady but filled with emotion. He began to speak, his voice low and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of truth. I wasn't planning to make this video, but I can't stay silent anymore. What happened last night isn't just about me. This is about everyone who has ever been treated like they don't belong, just because of the color of their skin, just because they look different. He paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the camera, as if he were speaking directly to each viewer. My friends and I walked into a restaurant, willing to wait, willing to follow every rule, but we were turned away, not because there weren't any tables, but because they thought we didn't belong there. They didn't say it outright, but their looks, their attitude, and their words said it all. Snoop recounted the entire incident, from the moment he walked into the restaurant and faced the judgmental stares of the diners, to the moment the manager asked him to leave. He didn't embellish or exaggerate, he simply told the truth, but that truth was enough to make anyone listening feel the sting of injustice. I'm not making this video to seek attention. I don't need that. I'm doing this because I know there are so many people out there like me, people who have been treated unfairly just because they don't fit someone else's standards, and I want to tell them they're not alone. Snoop's video was uploaded to social media the next morning. Within hours, it had garnered millions of views and shares, but this time, public opinion was divided. His story had split the online community into two distinct camps. One side supported him, speaking out in his defense and condemning the discrimination he had faced. The sad truth is that this still happens, even to someone as famous as Snoop. We need to change this. I've been through something similar and I know how painful it is. Thank you, Snoop, for speaking up. This isn't just about Snoop, this is about all of us. We need to stand together against injustice. Supporters of Snoop didn't just share his video, they also shared their own stories of being treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. Snoop's video became a spark, igniting conversations and bringing hidden stories of discrimination into the light. But on the other side, there were still those who criticized him, accusing him of overreacting and using his fame to draw attention to himself. This is just a PR stunt. He's trying to get attention. There are bigger issues in the world. Why should we care about this? If he didn't make a reservation, being turned away is fair. Don't turn a small issue into a big deal. The negative comments didn't surprise Snoop, but they still saddened him. He knew that in any fight, there would always be people who didn't stand with him. But he also knew that the truth had its own power. In the days that followed, Snoop's story became a hot topic in the media. Major news outlets, talk shows, and social activists all joined the discussion. Other restaurants were also called out for similar discriminatory practices. Snoop's story had sparked a larger conversation about injustice and prejudice in society. Snoop didn't stop at posting the video. He participated in interviews, spoke with social organizations, and used his influence to call for change. He knew this wasn't just about one interrupted dinner. This was about a much bigger issue, one that had existed for far too long and needed to be addressed. A week later, Snoop received a letter from a 15-year-old boy. In the letter, the boy shared that he had been bullied at school because of the color of his skin, and Snoop's video had given him the strength to stand up for himself. "Thank you for speaking up," the boy wrote. "You've shown me that I don't have to stay silent when I'm treated unfairly." That letter warmed Snoop's heart. He realized that no matter how many people criticized him, if even one person was inspired by his story, then all his efforts were worth it. That night, Snoop sat by the window, looking out at the city lights sparkling in the distance. He knew the fight against injustice wouldn't end overnight, but he also knew he had done something meaningful. He had lit a fire, and he would keep it burning, because he believed that truth and justice would always prevail. Snoop returned home after a long day, his mind still heavy with the events of recent days. The house was eerily quiet, with only the sound of his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. He walked into his recording studio, a small room he often retreated to when he needed space to think. The room, lined with soundproof panels, was where he had written some of his most emotional songs, stories of his life. But tonight, he wasn't there to create music. He was there to confront memories he had tried to bury for years. Snoop sat down in his familiar chair, the light from the desk lamp casting a soft glow on his face. In front of him was the microphone, but he didn't turn it on. Instead, he closed his eyes, letting the memories of the past flood back like a relentless wave. The memories took him back to his childhood, growing up in a poor neighborhood. He vividly remembered the feeling of being watched, judged, simply because of the color of his skin. One of the most painful memories surfaced clearly in his mind, as if it had happened just yesterday. It was a summer afternoon when Snoop was just 12 years old. Young Snoop, wearing old sneakers and a faded t-shirt, was walking through a wealthy neighborhood on his way to a friend's house. He didn't think much about how he might look out of place there. To him, it was just a street leading to his friend's home, nothing more. But to the people living there, his presence was something suspicious. As Snoop walked past a large house with a white picket fence, a police car suddenly pulled up beside him. Two officers stepped out, their eyes filled with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" one of them asked coldly. Snoop, too young to fully understand the situation, answered honestly, "I'm going to my friend's house." But his answer didn't satisfy them. They told him to stop, began searching his pockets and backpack, ignoring his repeated protests that he hadn't done anything wrong. Neighbors started stepping out of their homes, staring at the scene. Some whispered to each other, while others just stood there, their eyes filled with judgment. "Do you know this isn't a place for someone like you?" the second officer said, his tone dripping with condescension. Snoop felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't understand why he was being treated this way. He was just a kid carrying nothing but a backpack and a basketball. But to them, he was a threat, simply because of the color of his skin. After a long and humiliating search, finding nothing, they finally let him go. But before leaving, one of the officers leaned down, looked him straight in the eye and said, "Next time, stay out of this area. This isn't a place for you." Snoop didn't say anything. He just nodded and walked away, trying to hold back his tears. But as he left, he knew he had lost a piece of his childhood innocence. He realized that, in the eyes of some people, he would always be judged, not for who he was, but for the color of his skin. That memory jolted Snoop awake, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around the recording studio, feeling as though the air had grown heavier. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the night sky. The city lights sparkled in the distance, but inside he felt a deep sadness. That wasn't the only time he had been treated unfairly. As he grew older, Snoop faced countless instances of being denied opportunities, being underestimated, simply because of his race. He remembered the time he was denied a sports scholarship, even though he was one of the best players on the team. The reason they gave was, "We need a more suitable role model." He knew exactly what they meant by that. These memories weren't just scars on his soul, They were also the fuel for his determination to keep fighting. He knew that if he didn't speak up, if he didn't do something, kids like the 12-year-old Snoop he once was would continue to endure the same injustices. Snoop returned to his desk, opened his laptop, and began to write. He wasn't writing a song this time, but a letter, a message to everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. He wrote about his experiences, about the times he felt like he didn't belong, and about his determination to change that. "I can't change the past, but I can do something for the future," he wrote. "I want all of you to know that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you deserve respect. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong." When he finished, Snoop felt a sense of relief. He knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. There were millions of people out there who had experienced the same things, and they were waiting for someone to stand up and speak for them. That night, Snoop sat by the window again, looking out at the city. He thought about the 12-year-old boy he used to be, the boy who had felt small and powerless in the face of injustice. But now, he was no longer that boy. He was Snoop, a man with a voice, with the power to make a difference. And he vowed that he would never let another child go through what he had gone through. He would keep fighting, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated like they didn't belong, because he believed that justice wasn't a privilege, it was a right that everyone deserved. Snoop's video quickly became the center of attention on social media, spreading at lightning speed. Within just a few days, millions of views, comments, and shares turned his story into a movement. His heartfelt, emotional words didn't just resonate with those who had experienced injustice, but also sparked outrage within the community. This was no longer just his story. It had become a symbol of a larger issue: discrimination and social injustice. Many celebrities began to voice their support for Snoop. Rappers, singers, actors, and even social activists used their platforms to share his video and express their solidarity. Some even recounted similar stories of injustice they had faced. A famous rapper, who had previously collaborated with Snoop on a music project, posted a lengthy message on Instagram. "I've been denied entry to a club before just because I wasn't wearing the right clothes, but I knew it wasn't about my outfit." Snoop's story isn't just his, it's all of ours. It's time we stand up and say, enough is enough. A well-known social activist also shared Snoop's video, adding their own commentary. "Discrimination isn't new, but the sad truth is that it still happens even today. Thank you, Snoop, for having the courage to speak out. We stand with you." Personal stories from both celebrities and ordinary people began to surface everywhere. An actress shared how she had been denied a role because she didn't fit the image the audience expected. A young entrepreneur revealed that he had been turned down for a partnership opportunity simply because of his background. These stories, though different in context, all shared a common thread: the injustice they endured because of societal prejudice. Meanwhile, the restaurant where the incident occurred became the target of widespread criticism. The online community quickly called for a boycott of the establishment. Negative reviews flooded food review websites, causing the restaurant's ratings to plummet. Even loyal customers spoke out, vowing not to return until the restaurant issued a public apology. "I used to love this place, but after seeing how they treated Snoop and his friends, I can't support them anymore," one customer wrote on Twitter. "There's no room for discrimination in our society. I'll never go back there," another commented. However, instead of issuing an apology, the restaurant chose to fight back. They hired a high-profile lawyer and claimed that Snoop was defaming their reputation. In a press release, they insisted that their refusal to serve Snoop and his friends was due to internal policies and had nothing to do with discrimination. "We have always adhered to fair and equitable policies in serving our customers. Mr. Snoop's accusations are baseless and have caused significant harm to our reputation," the restaurant's lawyer stated. This statement did nothing to calm public outrage. In fact, it only fueled the fire. Many people believed the restaurant was trying to evade responsibility and blame the victim. Despite the overwhelming support from the community, Snoop felt the pressure of the escalating situation. He knew this fight wasn't just about his own honor. It was about defending the truth and justice. When the restaurant announced plans to sue him for defamation, Snoop didn't back down. He decided to hire a legal team to prepare for the impending legal battle. In a live stream on social media, Snoop shared his thoughts with his fans. "I knew speaking out wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be people who'd try to silence me, but I can't back down. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly. I'll fight to the end, not for fame, but for the truth. Snoop's words only strengthened the community's support for him. The hashtag #StandWithSnoop quickly became a trending topic on Twitter, with millions of posts from people showing their solidarity. Social organizations also joined the movement, calling for changes in how businesses treat their customers and employees. The legal battle began to take shape, but Snoop wasn't alone. He received support from numerous organizations and individuals who were willing to stand by him in this fight. Some prominent lawyers even offered to help him pro bono, believing that this wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a fight for justice. Meanwhile, the restaurant continued to face mounting pressure. Their revenue plummeted, and some employees even quit their jobs, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. A former employee of the restaurant, in an anonymous interview, revealed that this wasn't the first time the establishment had discriminated against customers. "I've seen this happen many times before, but no one ever dared to speak up. I'm glad Snoop had the courage to do it," the employee said. As tensions continued to rise, Snoop remained steadfast in his stance. He knew this fight wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't back down. With the community's support, he felt a responsibility to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. That night, Snoop sat in his recording studio, staring at the microphone in front of him. He knew that no matter how long the legal battle lasted, he wouldn't let the truth be distorted. He would continue to speak out, to fight, because he believed that justice would always prevail. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. An entire community stood behind him, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Snoop's story didn't just remain on social media. It spread to mainstream media outlets. Major television networks, from news channels to popular talk shows, all wanted to invite him to share his story. This was an opportunity for Snoop not only to recount what had happened, but also to emphasize the larger issue of racial discrimination and social injustice, something he knew many others had faced, just like him. That morning, Snoop sat in the waiting room of a major television studio. He wore a simple yet elegant suit, his eyes thoughtful as he stared at his phone screen. Messages of encouragement from friends, fans, and even strangers continued to pour in. But he knew that this interview wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, everyone who never had the chance to speak up. The host of the show entered the waiting room, smiling as she extended her hand to Snoop. "Thank you for being here today. We're really looking forward to hearing your story," she said. Snoop nodded, returning a faint smile. He had mentally prepared himself for this interview, but he also knew that not everyone would be on his side. There would be tough questions, criticisms, and challenges, but he was ready to face them. As the interview began, the stage lights illuminated Snoop's face. The host started by introducing the incident, then invited Snoop to share his side of the story. He recounted everything calmly but with deep emotion, from the moment he and his friends entered the restaurant to how they were denied service without any valid reason. "I didn't make that video to seek attention," Snoop said, his voice steady and firm. "I made it because I didn't want the truth to be distorted. I made it because I know there are so many people out there who've experienced the same thing but never had the chance to speak up." The host nodded, her expression showing empathy. But not everyone in the room shared the same sentiment. Another journalist, invited to the show to balance the discussion, suddenly posed a provocative question. "Do you think you're exploiting this situation to promote your name? Clearly, your video has garnered a lot of attention, and that must be beneficial for your career." The question caused a tense silence in the room. Some members of the audience whispered among themselves, while the host tried to maintain her composure. But Snoop remained unfazed. He looked directly at the journalist, his gaze steady and unwavering, not with anger, but with determination. "I don't need to promote my name," Snoop replied, his voice calm but powerful. "My name has been built through years of hard work. I'm not doing this for fame. I'm doing this because I want justice. And if speaking out can help others avoid going through what I went through, then I'm willing to face all the criticism." Snoop's response left the room silent for a moment. The host smiled, clearly impressed by how he handled the situation. The audience began to applaud, and on social media, the clip of Snoop's response quickly went viral, garnering thousands of supportive comments. After the interview, Snoop continued to appear on other shows. Each time he didn't just recount his story but also highlighted the larger issue. Discrimination still exists in society, no matter how far we think we've come. "This isn't just about me," he said during a late-night talk show. "This is about everyone who's ever been denied opportunities, underestimated, or judged just because they look different. We can't keep ignoring this issue. Snoop's words not only inspired people, but also sparked widespread discussions in the media. Activists, scholars, and ordinary people joined the conversation, sharing their opinions and their own stories. Some even organized workshops and events to raise awareness about discrimination and social injustice. However, not everyone supported Snoop. Some accused him of blowing the issue out of proportion or seeking attention. These negative comments appeared on social media and even in some articles. But Snoop didn't let the criticism discourage him. He knew that in any fight, there would always be people who didn't stand with him. "I can't please everyone," he said in an interview, "but I'm not doing this to please anyone. I'm doing this because I believe that truth and justice are what matter most." Snoop's appearances in the media didn't just allow him to share his story. They turned him into a symbol of the fight against discrimination. People who had remained silent now felt encouraged to speak up. Stories of injustice that had been buried for years were now being brought to light. A prominent social activist spoke about Snoop in an interview. "Snoop isn't just an artist. He's someone who dares to stand up for what's right, and that has the power to change an entire community." That night, after a long day of interviews, Snoop returned home. He sat in his recording studio, staring at the microphone in front of him. He knew the fight was far from over, and there would be many challenges ahead. But he also knew he wasn't alone. The community was standing behind him, and he would continue to speak out, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. As the city lights sparkled outside his window, Snoop silently vowed, "Justice isn't easy to achieve, but it's always worth fighting for." And he knew he wouldn't stop until the truth was brought to light. The public pressure continued to mount, and the restaurant where the incident occurred became the center of criticism. Peaceful protests began to take place in front of the restaurant, with hundreds of people participating. They carried signs with messages like, "Justice for all," "No room for discrimination," and "We will not stay silent." The protesters weren't just Snoop's fans. They were people who had experienced injustice themselves, people who felt it was time to speak up. At first, the restaurant owner remained defiant. They believed that hiring a lawyer and issuing a press release denying all accusations would help them weather the storm. But they were wrong. Public outrage didn't subside. Instead, it grew stronger. News articles, television programs, and social media all focused on the incident, turning it into a symbol of the broader issue of discrimination in the service industry. The restaurant's revenue plummeted. Loyal customers turned their backs, declaring that they could no longer support a place that engaged in discriminatory practices. Some suppliers even terminated their contracts, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Faced with this dire situation, the restaurant owner had no choice but to issue a public apology. A press conference was held at the restaurant, attended by reporters and media outlets. The restaurant owner, a middle-aged man with a tense expression, stepped up to the podium. He held the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd before taking a deep breath. "First and foremost, I want to extend my sincerest apologies to Mr. Snoop and his friends, as well as to everyone who felt hurt by our actions," he said, his voice trembling. "We recognize that what happened was unacceptable, and we take full responsibility for it." He went on to announce that the manager and staff involved in the incident had been terminated. He also promised that the restaurant would conduct training sessions on equality and diversity for all employees to ensure that such incidents would never happen again. Although his apology, albeit late, managed to calm some people, many others felt it wasn't enough. They believed the apology was merely a move to salvage the restaurant's reputation rather than a genuine expression of remorse. Shortly after the press conference, several former employees of the restaurant began to speak out. In anonymous interviews, they revealed that this wasn't the first time the restaurant had engaged in discriminatory behavior. One former employee who had worked there for years shared, "I've witnessed many instances where customers were treated unfairly just because they didn't fit the restaurant's image, but no one dared to say anything because they were afraid of losing their jobs." Another former employee recounted that during internal meetings, management often emphasized the need to maintain a luxurious image, which was often understood as not serving people they deemed unsuitable. These revelations quickly spread across social media, turning the incident into a much larger scandal. In response to the new wave of criticism, the restaurant was forced to temporarily close its doors to review internal policies and procedures. A sign was hung outside the restaurant reading, Temporarily closed for service improvements. We apologize for the inconvenience. But for many, this wasn't just about improving service. It was about ethics and accountability. When asked about the restaurant's apology, Snoop gave a straightforward response during an interview. "I didn't do this to get an apology. I did this so people would realize that discrimination still exists, and we need to change. An apology is a first step, but it's not enough. They need to act, not just talk." Snoop's words continued to resonate strongly with the community. Many felt that he had voiced their thoughts, that an apology only held meaning when accompanied by real change. Meanwhile, the protests continued, not just in front of the restaurant, but also at other locations across the city. Protesters weren't just demanding justice for Snoop, they were calling for systemic change in how businesses treated their customers and employees. What began as a personal incident had now grown into a larger social movement, aiming to combat all forms of discrimination. A few weeks later, the restaurant announced that it would reopen, but with an entirely new management team and improved policies. They also pledged to donate a portion of their profits to organizations fighting for equality and justice. However, for many, the restaurant's reputation had been irreparably damaged. Snoop, though no longer directly involved in the incident, continued to use his voice to raise awareness about discrimination. He participated in events, workshops, and even collaborated with social organizations to push for change. That night, as he sat in his recording studio, Snoop looked out the window at the city lights sparkling in the distance. He knew that this fight wasn't just about one restaurant, it was about a much larger issue. And while some progress had been made, he also knew there was still a long way to go. But he wasn't discouraged. He believed that with the community's unity, change was possible, and he would continue to fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. Because he knew that justice, even when it comes late, is always worth waiting for. After days of dealing with the media, public opinion, and protests, Snoop found solace in his recording studio. For him, music wasn't just a job, it was a sanctuary, a place where he could express emotions and thoughts that words alone couldn't convey. The recent events had left him with a whirlwind of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also hope. And he knew the best way to deliver his message was through music. One evening, Snoop sat at his desk, pen in hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper. He began writing the first lines of a new song, inspired by his own journey. The song wasn't just about the incident at the restaurant. It was about his life story. It was about growing up as a black boy in poverty, becoming a rap star, and the injustices he had faced along the way. "I want this song to be more than just my story," Snoop thought. "I want it to be the voice of everyone who's ever been treated unfairly, everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong." The words began to flow. He wrote about his childhood, growing up in a poor neighborhood where dreams were often crushed by harsh realities. He wrote about the times he was judged because of the color of his skin, about the doors that were slammed in his face, and about how he overcame it all to stand where he was today. But he didn't shy away from addressing the injustices that he and his community continued to face, even after achieving success. When the lyrics were complete, Snoop stepped into the recording booth. He chose a powerful beat, with pounding drums and deep bass, creating an atmosphere that was both somber and determined. His voice rang out, each line of his rap a declaration. "They told me I don't belong, but I'm still here standing strong. From the streets to the stage, I've been fighting all along." The song wasn't just a personal story, it was a call to action. In the chorus, Snoop emphasized the message of unity and the fight for justice. "We rise, we fight, we won't back down tonight. Justice is our anthem, and we'll keep the fire alight." But the song didn't hold back from directly criticizing those who supported racism. In a fiery verse, Snoop condemned those who tried to distort the truth and defend unjust actions. "You hide behind your lies, but the truth is in our eyes. Your hate won't silence me, I'll make the whole world see." When the song was released, it quickly became a hit. Streaming platforms were flooded with plays and shares. Fans praised the song not just for its captivating beat, but for its powerful message. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeAnthem began trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of injustice. One fan wrote, "Snoop has spoken for all of us. This song isn't just music, it's a movement." However, the song also sparked controversy. Some people felt that the lyrics were too harsh, especially the parts that directly criticize supporters of racism. Critics in the music and political spheres accuse Snoop of inciting rather than reconciling. An article in a major newspaper stated, "While Snoop's message is admirable, the way he delivers it may cause more division than unity. Music should be a bridge, not a weapon." These criticisms quickly became a hot topic on talk shows and social media. Some defended Snoop, arguing that he was simply speaking the truth that many were too afraid to confront. One social media user commented, "If the truth makes you uncomfortable, the problem isn't Snoop's song, it's you." When asked about the controversy surrounding the song, Snoop responded candidly in an interview, "I didn't write this song to please everyone. I wrote it to tell the truth, and the truth isn't always comfortable. But if we keep avoiding it, how can we ever change?" He also emphasized that the song wasn't meant to incite violence or hatred, but to raise awareness and inspire unity. "I'm not calling for violence or hate, I'm calling for justice. And if that makes some people feel threatened, then maybe they need to ask themselves why." Despite the controversy, Snoop's song created a powerful wave within the community. Many people felt inspired to speak up and take action. Social organizations used the song in their events and campaigns, turning it into a symbol of the fight against discrimination. A prominent social activist remarked, "Snoop's music isn't just art, it's a tool for change. He's turned his pain into power, and that has an incredible impact." That night, as Snoop sat alone in his studio, he listened to his song again. He knew not everyone would understand or agree with his message, but he also knew that his music had touched the hearts of many, and that was enough. Looking out the window at the city lights sparkling in the distance, Snoop smiled. He knew his journey was far from over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With his music and the community standing behind him, he believed that change was possible. And in that moment, he silently vowed, "They might not hear me when I speak, but they'll hear me when I sing." A year after the shocking incident at the restaurant, Snoop's life had changed in many ways. He was no longer just a famous rapper. He had become a symbol of the fight against injustice and discrimination. Over the past year, his songs, interviews, and actions had inspired millions. But Snoop knew that this fight couldn't stop at words or music. He wanted to do more, to turn change into reality. With that in mind, Snoop decided to organize a charity concert to raise funds for organizations fighting against racial discrimination. The concert wasn't just a musical event, it was a call to action, an opportunity for people to come together and stand for justice. The concert was held at a massive stadium, capable of holding tens of thousands of people. From early morning, crowds began to gather, carrying signs with messages like, "Justice for all," "Music for change," and "We are one." The atmosphere was electric, filled with excitement and hope. The attendees weren't just Snoop's fans, they included people who had once criticized him. They came to listen, to understand, and to join together in making a difference. Backstage, Snoop stood watching the sea of people waiting for the show to begin. He felt a mix of nervousness and pride. This wasn't just a performance, it was a milestone in his journey. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage to the deafening cheers of the crowd. The concert began with some of Snoop's most well-known songs, the hits that had made him a household name. But the highlight of the night was his new song, written after the restaurant incident, the song that had become a symbol of the movement against discrimination. As the first notes played, the stadium erupted. Thousands of voices joined in, singing every word like a powerful declaration. "We rise, we fight, we won't back down tonight. Justice is our anthem, and we'll keep the fire alight." Snoop looked out at the crowd, feeling the strength of their unity. He knew his music had transcended entertainment and become a tool for social change. Midway through the concert, Snoop paused and took the microphone, his voice warm but filled with emotion. "Tonight, I don't just want to share my music. I want to share a story that isn't just mine, but one that belongs to so many of us." He invited someone onto the stage, a former employee of the restaurant where the incident had occurred. The person, a middle-aged woman with a nervous but determined expression, stepped forward to the sound of encouraging applause from the audience. She took the microphone, her voice trembling but sincere. "I used to work at that restaurant. I saw the injustices that happened there, but I stayed silent. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid I wouldn't be able to support my family. But today, I don't want to stay silent anymore." She recounted what she had witnessed. The times customers were turned away simply because they didn't fit the restaurant's image, the prejudiced words and actions she had seen. She admitted that her silence had contributed to those injustices and apologized for not speaking out sooner. But thanks to Snoop, I've realized that silence isn't the answer. We need to stand up to speak the truth, no matter how hard it is. Her story left the entire stadium in silence. Many in the crowd were moved to tears, feeling the pain and courage in her words. When she finished, the stadium erupted in applause and cheers. Snoop stepped forward, hugged her tightly, and then turned to the audience. This is why we're here tonight. Not to criticize, not to divide, but to change. Each of us has the power to make that change. The concert continued with more inspiring songs, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just a performance. It had become a moment of connection, empathy, and hope. As the concert came to an end, Snoop stood on the stage, looking out at the thousands of fans holding up signs and phone lights. He felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before, a deep understanding that he was no longer just a rapper, but a symbol of struggle and hope. He took the microphone, his voice echoing through the silent crowd. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for believing, for fighting, and for not giving up. This journey isn't just mine, it's all of ours. And I know that with our unity, we can create change. He smiled, looking out at the sea of people before him. He knew his journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges ahead. But he also knew he wasn't alone. With his music, his community, and his belief in justice, he was confident that the future could be brighter. In that moment, Snoop felt a profound sense of peace. He closed his eyes, listening to the cheers of the crowd, and silently vowed, "This is just the beginning, we'll keep going together."